Welcome to Risk and Resilience podcast. I'm your host, Fox Ahmed, and I'm broadcasting today with one of the most, well, a couple of the most significant stories that's happened over the last week, focusing on technology policy, government power, and enterprise security over the last couple of days. And I think the past 7 days, they have revealed a kind of fundamental shift in how we need to think about cybersecurity risk, data sovereignty, and also the relationship between government and technology companies. We have, a major insurance company also, which I'm going to share today, revealing that the economics of extortion has also fundamentally changed. There's also been an unprecedented standoff between an AI company and also the Pentagon over fundamental liberties. We also have state-sponsored espionage campaigns operating at an industrial kind of scale. And we have vulnerabilities in AI-powered development tools that also creates a new kind of supply chain risk in itself. And I think for me, these aren't kind of separate stories. I think they're all interconnected kind of threads in kind of new risk environment that kind of our organization kind of needs to kind of understand. So if you work in financial services or in technology or in any regulated industry, I think the next 30 minutes could kind of fundamentally kind of give you a way of thinking, the new approach for cyber risk assessments, or also maybe for your organizational kind of resilience. And I think the first thing, I want to share today, I'm start sharing on my screen, is around the cyber insurance claims that's been shared. There's a cyber insurance company called kind of Resilience, and they released their kind of 2025 cyber kind of risk report. And I think this is a kind of real claims data, which they kind of gathered from thousands of organizations, and it reveals something critical about changes and how you should be thinking about cyber risk. And I think the fundamental economics of ransomware has also kind of shifted in a way. And I want to precise about this because the implications could be material for your organization. I think in the first half of 2025, kind of extortion demands have accounted for like 49% of all extortion kind of claims in terms of the data that's been stolen. I think what that means is slightly less than half of ransomware attacks were focused on data theft rather than encryption. By the second half of 2025, that number jumped to 65%. And let me just say this clearly. So H1 2025, 49% of attacks were data theft, and in H2 2025, 65% were data theft. So across the entire year of 2025, data theft only attacks represented 57% of all ransomware incidents. And Resilience's analysis predicts that by the end of 2026, data exfiltration will represent the majority of all extortion attacks. And why does this matter? Because it fundamentally changes your kind of recovery strategy. So you'll have encryption-based ransomware, which has a kind of single leverage point. You either get your backups kind of working, or you pay the ransomware. Data theft gives attackers kind of unlimited leverage. There's reputational damage, regulatory exposure, there's supply chain pressure, and also there's long-term financial consequences. And also phishing has become the primary point of failure. And I think the second kind of critical finding in the report is that phishing, specifically AI amplified social engineering, has become the number one loss driver in cyber insurance claims. So in 2024, phishing represented 21% of incurred losses. And in 2025, that number jumped to 50% of incurred losses. That's more than doubling in a single year. So fueled by AI kind of amplified social engineering, the financial severity of claims has become increasingly concentrated. So this means there's fewer incidents, but there's higher individual severity. So from a resilience standpoint, I think this is a problem because your traditional defenses, where you have your backup strategies, your kind of encryption, your network segmentation, they don't stop kind of credential compromise. Kind of what matters is how fast you can detect it, how fast you can contain it. Vendor risk is also a second highest loss category in their report. And across Resilience's kind of portfolio, they kind of identified vendor risk represented nearly 1/5 or 18% of total losses. So that makes it second highest loss category. Threat actors are leveraging password reset attacks. They're infiltrating open source code repositories that serve as a foundation for some of the enterprise kind of applications. So when a critical vendor gets compromised, you get a cascade effect, short-term disruption, long-term exposure, and industry-wide kind of impact. The resilience data suggests that threat actors are now conducting longer, kind of more calculated campaigns, and attacks are more strategic. Then, therefore, resulting losses don't just end when you kind of restore the system itself. I think there's a long-term kind of financial impact. So, as your CFOs or your audit committees or your risk managements, what they need to understand is that the cyber incidents now carry substantial long-tail financial impacts. The co-founder and the CEO of Resilience, they kind of put it this way, is that the real risk is about more than a security incident's immediate disruption. It's about the long-tail aftershocks that follow. Claims that used to resolve to 6 to 12 months now routinely stay open for 24 months to 6 months. Why? Because forensic accounting, litigation, regulatory investigations, and also multi-jurisdictional compliance obligations. The financial tail extends well beyond the incident itself, sometimes even years. So what that means is that your balance sheet reserve for cyber incidents is probably understated. Your insurance coverage is probably inadequate. And I think Resilience's recommendation is very direct. What they're saying here is that cyber attacks are being more calculated, more strategic, and well planned than before. Therefore, resulting losses can extend well beyond the moment they happen and accumulate over months and even years. And I think that's the new reality. That's the foundation for everything else that we're discussing today. Something that's, been unfolding in real time over the last 72 hours. I think this is a governance story, not just a kind of technology story. So Anthropic, the company behind Claude AI, signed a $200 million contract with the Department of War back in July 2025. They were the first frontier AI company to deploy their models on classified government networks. And I think they were the first to deploy at the national kind of laboratories as well, and also to provide custom models for national security customers. So Claude is extensively deployed across the Department of War for mission-critical applications. And I think their focus is on intelligence analysis, modeling and simulation, operational planning, and cyber operations. But this week, it all came to a grinding halt. So on February 26, Dario, the CEO of Anthropic, released a statement here outlining 2 uses that Claude, that the company would not permit. So, regardless of the government kind of demanding or threatening them. So I think the first one was around the mass domestic surveillance of Americans. So their position is that using these systems for mass domestic surveillance is incompatible with democratic values. AI-driven mass surveillance presents serious novel risks to our fundamental liberties. And second of all, fully autonomous weapons, systems that take humans completely out of the loop for targeting decisions. And here's what he had to say. Even fully autonomous weapons may prove critical for our national defense, but today frontier AI systems are simply not reliable enough to power fully autonomous weapons. We will not only provide a product that puts America's warfighters and civilians at risk. So what he's saying is that Anthropic are not refusing military use of AI, but the company has explicitly kind of, they did say they will support this, the lawful foreign intelligence, counterintelligence, and even partially autonomous weapons like those used in Ukraine. But Anthropic's position was very specific. They narrowed down on 2 use cases where they would refuse blankly. And I think why this matters, and I think, the reliability concern, this is where Claude AI, Anthropic has got into. I think what they did was there were simulations which were conducted with the frontier AI models which showed something a bit more disturbing. So when these models were asked to reason through geopolitical crisis and also model potential escalation pathways, they recommended escalation towards nuclear signaling in 95% of test cases. Think about that statistic. 95% of the time when you ask an advanced AI system to model how a conflict might escalate, it suggests nuclear escalation as a viable pathway. One analysis of competing AI model behavior noted was that the leadership profile suggests erratic, dramatic gestures and dangerously high risk tolerance, traits which were associated with overconfidence and poor collaboration. That's exactly of opposite of what you want in a system that controls lethal force. So from a risk management perspective, this is critical. Anthropic was essentially saying, we understand government needs advanced AI for national security, we support that, but the current systems aren't reliable enough for certain use cases. And we're not willing to hand over the responsibility without proper safeguards. And the government's response, well, this is where it gets a bit more, a bit weirder, is that the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, demanded that Anthropic agree to allow Department of War to use Claude for all lawful purposes with no restrictions, no carve-outs, and with no exceptions. Again, Anthropic refused. They did offer to work with the Pentagon on research and development to improve the reliability, but they would not agree to unrestricted deployment. So Hegseth gave them a deadline on Friday that went past on February 28th to either you comply or you face consequences. Anthropic did not comply. So on Friday, President Trump issued an order directing every federal agency to immediately cease use of Anthropic's technology. Secretary Hegseth then designated Anthropic as a supply chain risk to national security. And what this means in practice is that with effective immediately, there's no contractor or supplier or partner that does business with the United States military may conduct any commercial activity with Anthropic. And then Anthropic will continue to provide the Department of War its services for a period of no more than 6 months in order to allow for a seamless transition to a better and more patriotic service. And I think that's economic coercion. And that's using government purchasing power to force compliance with government demands. Anthropic responded by challenging the designation in court. And I think their statement said that the Secretary does not have the statutory authority to back up the statement. Legally, a supply chain risk designation under 10 U.S.C. 3252 can only extend to the use of Claude as part of Department of War contracts. It cannot affect how contractors use Claude to serve other customers. And I think the risk implications for enterprise and organization is that, the first vendor risk has now kind of a new dimension. So if you're a vendor that does business with government, you now face regulatory and also political risk embedded in that relationship. A company can designate a supply chain risk if it refuses to comply with the demands. And I think second, there's also precedent risk. The government has just demonstrated that it would use economic coercion and also supply chain designations to enforce compliance. So every tech vendor that has a relationship with the United States kind of government, you have the needs to be reassessed through that lens. And I think the other last question we'll probably have is, who decides how powerful technology is deployed? Is it the company that built it, or is it the government, or is it the market? And I think right now the government is certain that it has authority to make that decision unilaterally. But then the story gets even more weird is OpenAI comes into the scene. And on Friday, the same day when Trump banned Anthropic, OpenAI announced that he had signed an agreement with the Pentagon. Sam Altman, the OpenAI CEO, said his company shares Anthropic's concerns about surveillance and also autonomous weapons, but OpenAI was willing to accept those safeguards with a government contract framework rather than insisting them as a non-negotiable precondition. And I think that distinction kind of matters. So, one company is drawing a line that it won't cross, regardless of government pressure. But then on the other hand, the other is accepting safeguards within a contract that the government can potentially modify. So for financial institutions and technology companies watching this, is that the implication is clear. Companies that refuse government demands face economic consequences, and companies that accept government demands with safeguards can continue operating. So that was an interesting update from that side. The other one I want to share is the on February the 18th, I think a week before Anthropic's kind of crisis happening, I think the Trump administration issued an internal diplomatic cable. So Secretary of State, Secretary Marco directed U.S. diplomats to actively oppose foreign data sovereignty laws. So the cable said that the data sovereignty or data localization laws could disrupt AI services and also cloud computing operations provided by US firms. The State Department is telling countries around the world, don't require that data collected within your borders stay within your borders. Don't regulate how US tech companies handle your organization's data, and also eliminate those requirements. They're barriers to trade. They impede AI development. And I think the cable specifically pointed out the EU's GDPR as an example of what the US considers as unnecessarily burdensome data processing restrictions and cross-border data flow requirements. The US is pushing for what it calls a more assertive and international data policy and directing diplomats to counter unnecessary burdensome regulations such as data localization mandates. I think the symmetry here is, but there's also the tension. At the exact time, the US government is pressuring other countries to eliminate data localization requirements. The US government is deploying AI systems that are ingesting massive volumes of government data. When ChatGPT is deployed on Gen AI MIL, which is the Pentagon's AI platform serving over 1 million military personnel, you've got to understand is what data flows into that system. Is it military operations? Is it intelligence assessments? Is it personnel files, procurement decisions, internal communications? The data is being provided to a whole range of private kind of technology companies. And I think here's the critical question, is what happens to the data after the query is processed? Is it retained for training? Is it used for analytical purposes? Or is it shared with other government agencies? Well, we don't have the transparency into those data flows, so it's hard to tell. So the US is essentially saying is you must allow global kind of data flows for American companies, but we're not going to collect your data into our AI systems, and we're not going to tell you what happens to it. And I think for financial institutions, and technology companies, it creates a complex governance problem. So what this means for financial services is, if you're a bank, what does it mean? And I think the issue is that first, your data residence requirements that you built into comply with GDPR or PCI DSS or other regulatory frameworks are caught between conflicting pressures. The US wants data flow freely, but your regulators want data localization, and your customers want the data protected. And second, if you use US-based AI services or cloud platforms, you need to understand what data flows into those systems when they're integrated with government operations. Is your data being ingested into Gen AI MIL? Could it be accessed by government agencies? So that's something you guys need to think about. And I think this has caused a kind of geopolitical and also regulatory risk that most organizations are not adequately addressing. The other interesting part is I want to share an update on the Google's threat intelligence group and Mandiant, where they announced that they had disrupted a global espionage campaign. This shows what's happening while all of this AI policy drama is unfolding. The threat actor, known as UNC2814, a suspected China nexus group that Google has been tracking since 2017, has a long history of targeting international governments, global telecommunications organizations across Africa, Asia, and Americas, and had confirmed intrusions into 42 countries. And and when the disruption was kind of executed. So we're talking about 53 confirmed victims across 42 countries, and suspected infections in in at least 20 more kind of countries itself. So this is called the grid-tied backdoor. The group deployed a novel backdoor called grid-tied. So here's how it's made it sophisticated. It used Google Sheets API as a command and control structure. So rather than exploiting a vulnerability, the attackers were abusing legitimate cloud functionality to hide their malicious traffic behind there. And the attacker was using API calls to communicate with the SaaS apps as a command and control infrastructure to disguise their malicious traffic, and also as a common tactic used by threat actors when attempting to improve the stealth of their intrusion. I think the malware treated Google spreadsheet as a communication channel as well, and then it was from there. So, and I think that the threat actor dropped the grid tied on endpoints containing personally identified information, There's names, date of birth, phone numbers, and voter IDs and national IDs. So, and I think what Google saying is that when they assess the targeting of the PII in this engagement, it's very consistent with cyber espionage activity in telecommunications, which is primarily leveraged to identify, track, and monitor kind of persons of interest. Google did not directly observe data exfiltration during this campaign, but historical espionage campaigns have resulted in the theft of kind of core data records, unencrypted SMS messages, and the compromise of lawful intercept systems as well from that side. The other news I want to share is that Checkpoint researchers also disclosed some serious vulnerabilities in Anthropic's Claude Code, which is the AI-powered command line development tool. The vulnerabilities here that allowed attackers to achieve remote code execution and also steal API credentials by injecting malicious configuration code into repositories. So here's the attack. So a kind of developer clones a repository. The repository contains a malicious configuration file in the Claude settings. And then when the developer opens that project in Claude Code, the malicious configurations execute automatically without the developer's awareness or consent. Why this matters is that simple cloning a malicious repository could also compromise your whole entire development team. A single malicious commit could compromise any developer working on that repository, and also creates a new supply chain attack vector as well. So it's not just about your network penetration, but it's about compromising the development tools behind themselves. So Anthropic has said they have patched these vulnerabilities, but the incident illustrates a broader point. AI development tools are creating, attack surfaces that traditional security models haven't fully addressed. So what does all of this mean? I think I covered 5 separate news stories, but they're all kind of connected in a way. The resilience report shows the cyber criminals are shifting from encryption-based disruption to data theft-based extortion, which will create more longer-term financial impacts. Anthropic Standoff shows there's genuine tension between deploying powerful AI and ensuring democratic governance as well, on some of the other stuff as well. I think, from my side, I think we understand that technology is advancing faster than the kind of policy frameworks can accommodate. And I think governments are moving more aggressively to secure AI capabilities as well. So with that in mind, I think, thank you for listening to Risk and Resilience podcast. I'm your host, Fox Ahmed, and stay tuned and listen through my next one coming out next week.